very pleased to start this session. אני עובר לעברית. בפאנל שהוא
This panel, which is the concluding session of this day, includes 4 excellent speakers. They will participate as is written in the program. Yoel Naveh is the chief scientist, chief economist in the Ministry of Finance, and he works very hard to give the ministry all the basics of economics. Dr. Sami Miari, the Department of Labor Studies at the Tel Aviv University, is also an economist, if I remember well. Professor Roni Schub from the Free University of Berlin, who will speak in English. All the others will speak in Hebrew, as you could see, and perhaps we'll be able to make things more accurate. And we are waiting for Knesset member Michal Biran of the Zionist group, Zionist party. I would like to make some comments about the rules of discussion. Each of the people, of the panelists, will present for about 14 minutes, followed by a discussion with participation from the audience, and people will have the possibility to ask the panelists questions, and then there will be concluding remarks by the panelists. But before that, I'd like to discuss some of the questions or issues that came up. I think in the last discussion, there was a question or an issue about whether the labor market limits the possibility to create government policy. Like that question about whether minimum wages are damaging to labor, to employment. That is a serious question pertaining to the model, to the wage model. Is it a model in which there is place for politics, or should we let the market do its work the way it usually does? Regarding letting the market do its tricks, we are in fact in a sort of revolution, because in England, as well as in the United States, the public decided, either in Brexit or in electing Donald Trump, decided that they wanted to take their fate into their own hands. And when they're told that all kinds of things must be done because of globalization and economic theory, they say, no, we want something else. So I'd be happy if you could connect the dots here too, regarding and connect this to the working poor. I think a fundamental question which perhaps should precede our discussion is the fundamentals in labor market. For example, asking whether it is not natural for economies to have working poor always, and what do we want? Is poverty not part and parcel of the economy? So the government must interfere if the public's values are such that the government does not want too much inequality, then the government must interfere. There are obviously other issues regarding the market, regarding whether there is any influence of the fact that the labor market is a global one, with 500 million Chinese workers, for example. But I will let you begin. And the first one would be Yoel Naveh, please.
ראשון, יואל נווה, בבקשה.
So good evening. Thank you for the opportunity to participate in this panel. what I want to do with a limited number of slides is to look at some data to speak about inequality and poverty and put some emphasis on the working poor, because this is, of course, the topic of this symposium. I hope this works. So when we look at trends, apologies, when we look at trends in the last decade and a half, we see that in Israel, unlike the world, the inequality is on the decrease, while the net inequality, which was on the rise, in fact stabilized. So it means that the gap in Israel between brutto inequality, I'm not talking about absolute levels, and net inequality in Israel is reduced, has been reduced in recent years, and it is not growing. While in Western Europe, we see that the brute inequality is growing, while an intervention policy and redistribution of income becomes increasingly aggressive in these countries, and which preserves the net inequality at a steady level. And when we look at these countries, we ask whether this is sustainable. Can you continue with the present tools, with the West European models? Can you increase the government's intervention in income division over time, considering its budget cost and its implications, while the inequality is rising? This was one point. This decrease in brutto inequality is a result of the tremendous improvement in the Israeli labor market since the last economic crisis in the beginning of the years 2000. If we ignore a certain jump, we see a rise in the rate of participation in the labor market, a decrease in unemployment, and now we are in a situation where we are with full employment, with about 4.1% of unemployment and over 64% of participation in the labor market. It's a historical first. It was caused because of the entry of new populations into the labor market as a change in incentives, the reforms of 2003, and also a rise in education, a reform in the 90s with an increase in academic education as a result of the colleges that were built in Israel. So the brutto inequality is decreasing, has been decreasing in recent years, and it's beginning to affect the net inequality, because the effect of labor is higher than the decrease in the government's ability to redistribute income. When we look at growth in Israel in recent years, what we hear all the time, we say that it does not trickle down. It does not reach the lower deciles. This is OECD data about the growth of income from work according to groups between 2007 and 2014, an international comparison. So in Israel, the growth of income from work would be greater because Israel did not suffer from the last financial crisis. But look at the differences between the lower decile and the higher decile. Contrary to what we think, in percentages, the lower decile income had a higher rise than that of the upper decile. First of all, because more people participate in the labor market, as we said, but also because of a series of steps taken by the government and the improvement in the income as well as consumption of lower decile families, where there was a higher improvement than in the higher echelon of the higher deciles. The purchasing power of the poor in Israel has improved in recent years. And the median wage rose, and the poverty line rose, but in purchasing power, people below the poverty line have a higher purchasing power than before. When we look at the wage rises, there we have had sharp wage rises in Israel as a result of reality in the labor market and some decisions that were taken by the government and other elements. When we look at industries or sectors according to average wages, if we ignore high-tech, which has its own story, they have a tremendous shortage of qualified manpower, and they have high amounts of money flowing through the system. So there was a sharp increase in wage there. But in other sectors, you can see that in the lower wages sectors, there is a sharper rise in salaries. So not only rich people get higher wages, but even people who work in the food industry or service industries have higher wages. The minimum wage increase had a contribution to that. And we'll discuss it in a moment. So minimum wage. As you know, it is rising in Israel according to the government resolutions. When we look at this minimum wage compared with the median wage, in 2018 we will become almost world champions in minimum wages. I accept what I heard at the end of the previous talk. We think it will have a negative impact on the division of income between the poor and the poorest working people, because this is a tool for a redistribution of income between the very poor and the non-working poor. We see no influence on employment, but we'll see that we have full employment, we have shortage of workers, so even people with less qualifications can find a job, but we think that in the next crisis, we will find it more difficult to rally in 2018 at these levels of minimum wage, where we want to rally and get out of the crisis. It will be more difficult, especially for unqualified laborers. It will take more time. It will make it very possible for the labor market to get back to its feet. We've seen it happen in other countries, and we will probably need to intervene as far as policy is concerned. For example, to reduce the cost of labor. But this is not an efficient way to do it, reducing the cost of labor on the one hand while increasing the minimum wages on the other hand, and we need to think about it. And I agree that with the present political reality and the present labor market reality, we can't do anything about it, especially since the negative implications cannot be seen yet in the field. When we speak about inequality, we should distinguish inequality from poverty. According to our last research, a large amount of inequality in Israel is derived from the differences in the distribution of income in the upper decile, but otherwise we have no doubt that work is a remedy for poverty. It's true that this conference talks about the working poor, but you look at the significance of going to work among people, working families and no families. So we have poverty only among 5.6% of families that are poor, while there are two wage earners. Only 5.6% of these families are poor, so we need to solve their problem. The level of participation, the low level of participation is the main reason for poverty among Arabs and ultra-Orthodox, and we knew that these two groups are poorer, and again, their poverty is much lower among families with two wage earners. So the participation of these two sectors in the labor market should help in reducing poverty. Who really are the working poor? younger people, less educated people, those who work more hours, and there are less earners and more people in their households. When you look at the definition of poverty and the characteristics of households of the working poor, you see the data yourself, what is the average age, and probably lower qualification levels, they work more hours. There is a gap in education, but the most astounding is the number of people in a household. When among poor household with 2 earners, there are 5.6 children people, per family, per household. It may be not politically correct, but there is a choice of poverty. People are choosing to be poverty. They have more children, then they would become poor, because we're talking about income per capita, and we have to understand that too. Looking at Arabs and ultra-Orthodox households, they are the vast majority of the working poor. Again, when there are 2 wage earners, the poverty level is not high. So it is not the matter of just a matter of Arabs and ultra-Orthodox. Where there are single earners, poverty is more prevalent, and the reason for their poverty, in fact, in the Arab and ultra-Orthodox sector is that they have a higher number of members of the family, larger families, and only 1 wage earner, because ultra-Orthodox men don't work and Arab women don't work. Regarding the steps to be taken, we did a simulation to check what is the most efficient means to cope with the Gini coefficient decrease, and we found that negative income tax with 1 billion shekels is supposed to reduce the Gini coefficient, as you could see, and we think that this is the most efficient means to cope with inequality. That is the result, yes. Yes? Increasing the subsidy for public transportation, well, we know that the consumers of public transportations are people of a lower socioeconomic group, and that improves their situation, yes, in this respect.
Okay.
Thank you for listening.
תודה רבה.
Thank you very much.